The phone didn't ring so much as it trembled. A sharp, insistent buzz that split the hush of Jason Carter's corner office like a blade. He almost ignored it, almost let it slide into the collection of unanswered numbers and faceless requests that never reached his ear. Then the second buzz came, and something old and unquiet rose inside him, a memory of rain and hair, of a laugh thrown to the stars, and his finger swiped before his mind caught up. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1: The Call That Unstitched 10 Years. Carter. His voice crisp as the intersecting lines on the quarterly report glowing on his monitor. He always sounded like a verdict when he was working. There was a pause on the other end. He pictured a city's worth of breath held. Jason. A woman's voice, thinner than he remembered it but carrying a tensile strength under the tremor. It's Rebecca Moore." His body knew the name before his mind did. His chest clenched. Heat crashed through him in a dizzy wave, the kind that makes the world tilt on its axis. He said her name so softly that even the thick glass of his office windows seemed to lean in to hear. Rebecca. A long second. He could hear traffic far below, the metallic hiss of morning moving toward noon. He could hear his own heartbeat, a stubborn drum. "I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important," she said. She swallowed audibly, and he saw her in his mind, those changeable gray eyes, that stubborn chin. She had laughed like she could knock the sun off its course and make it look back at her. It's the twins. I didn't want to tell you over the phone, but twins." His chair scraped against the polished floor. He was on his feet now without remembering standing up. "What are you talking about?" "We were 24, she said. "I was going to tell you, and then I saw you with Claire and your mother at the Whitmore that night, and the way she looked at me like I was a stain on the tablecloth, and your mother came to my apartment later with a ring box and a society page announcement, and I couldn't. Rebecca, that was," he stopped. Words in his mouth, words 10 years stale, useless. He gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles throbbed. "What is this about the twins?" "My son," she said. "Our son Michael, he needs surgery. They think it's genetic, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. They need your medical history, and Jason, he's 10 and he's brave, he's so brave, but he's tired, and the walls of his heart are thick where they should be thin, and where are you?" "Boston Children S. I'll be there in 3 hours, he said. His voice had steel in it he hadn't used since the boardroom war that made him CEO. "Jason," she said softly, the name floating between them like a fragile thing. "I'm not calling for money." "I know," he lied. He didn't know anything but the feeling that the floor of his life had just dropped. The jet cut through a bruised sky, and every mile between Manhattan and Boston seemed like a confession he couldn't make. "I kept your number. I typed your name into a search bar once a year. I told myself you were happier this way. I let my mother call absence strategy. I accepted it because I was 19 kinds of coward." He stared at his reflection in the cabin window. 34 looked older on him than it had on his father. His father, who had died at 52 with a hand pressed to his chest and a life full of unspent Sundays. His father's medical records were locked in a fireproof box in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, guarded by his mother's taste and his mother's secrets. "Sir," a flight attendant leaned in. "Do you need anything?" "Yes," he said, surprising himself. "A pen." He wrote while cloud stitched to cloud, while the engine sang the geography into a thin, steady line. He wrote the names: Rebecca, Michael, Emily. He wrote the word he had spent a decade avoiding, and it scalded the page: children. Chapter 2: Room 412. Hospitals smell like boiled thyme. He remembered thinking that when his father died. They smell like antiseptic and old coffee and fear, and the fear is always the loudest thing in the room. The elevator doors opened on a floor of glossy tile and muted art prints meant to distract. He didn't look at any of it because he was already looking at the little square window on the door marked 412. The beep came first on the other side, steady, the small, stubborn language of machines. He saw a boy's profile, dark hair damp at his temples, lashes of vulnerable half-moon against his cheeks. He saw a girl curled in a chair, legs folded under her like a cat, a book spread like a tent over her lap. He saw a woman by the window, shoulders squared against the entire ocean of her life. He knocked. Her eyes snapped up and the years fell away from her face and then slammed back into place. "Hi," she said, and no one had ever put more unsaid syllables into one small word. "Hi." He stepped inside. He had negotiated contracts with men who'd renamed countries, and he had never felt so unsure where to put his hands. The girl closed her book carefully, marking her page with a piece of purple ribbon. "Is that him?" Rebecca nodded. "This is Jason," she said. Then, after a living pause, "Your father." The girl studied him like she could see every meeting he'd ever taken, every lie he'd ever told himself, every time he'd chosen work because work never had a face. You're taller than I thought, she decided. He almost laughed, almost. I've heard that before. His eyes returned to the boy. Michael, he asked, his voice stuck to his mouth. He was looking at his own mouth on a smaller face. He was looking at his own nose, his own stubborn eyebrows. The world rearranged itself quietly around the sight. Michael, Rebecca said gently, this is your dad. Michael's eyelids fluttered, heavied by medication. Hey, he murmured, breath hitching in that way that made parents press both palms to their chest without realizing it. We got a new doctor, she has sparkly shoes. He smiled. That sounds promising. They squeak when she walks, Emily added, and she calls us her team. Team fits, Jason said, because it did, because the room had the feeling of a huddle in it. He turned to Rebecca. The words came out wrong at first and then found their shape. What do you need? Her answer wasn't money, and it wasn't absolution, and it wasn't a story about 10 years. We need your father's medical history, she said. And yours. We need an echocardiogram and blood work, and Dr. Patel keeps saying myectomy like it's a word that's supposed to feel normal when it's anything but. Myectomy, he repeated, the syllables thick in his mouth. Michael needs open heart surgery. Rebecca closed her eyes for a beat. When she opened them, there was a fire behind the exhaustion that he remembered from nights on rooftops and mornings with cheap coffee. Yes. Jason took out his phone, typed the words and sent them to his assistant, to his general counsel, to a doctor on retainer he had never used for anything more serious than travel vaccinations. He dictated his father's name, the hospital that had tried to keep him alive, the cardiologist who had sent him home with a terror hidden in a brown paper bag. Everything, he said to Rebecca, to the room, to the machines. You'll have everything. Emily's voice cut in, sharp as a bell. We don't need your money. He looked at her. She had a chin that matched his and eyes that matched a storm. I know, he said, and he did. He felt it like a truth he could hold with both hands. I'm here because I am your father, not because I have a company. She stared for a long time, and he could almost see the ledger in her mind, columns of promises and losses and the long, unforgivable zeros of 10 years. Finally, she nodded once, reluctantly, as if she'd just agreed to keep a stray dog until it could prove it wouldn't bite. We'll see. Chapter 3. The night that took everything. They sat in the hallway while Michael slept. Rebecca with her hands around a paper cup she hadn't sipped from, Jason with his back against the wall like the wall was the only thing keeping him standing. There were sounds behind the closed door. The beep of a monitor and the small whir when a nurse laid a hand on a button to adjust something, and the soft murmur of voices using words like stable and trend. I went to the Whitmore to tell you, she said, voice flat and steady like a story she had sanded down because the splinters used to cut her. I had the ultrasound picture in my coat pocket. I ordered tea I didn't drink because I couldn't trust my hands around anything hot. And then your mother appeared at the back table with Claire Whitman and a photographer from the Post acquiring candidates no one had consented to. Your mother looked at me, and it felt like an interruption of a ritual. I didn't belong in that room. I was there because she asked me to settle things, he said, and realized the words were a cheap offering. I wasn't Claire and I, Rebecca laughed, a brittle sound that hurt to hear. It's fine, I left, then your mother found me anyway. The next morning, on my tiny stoop in Queens with a press release and a box, she said I was cruel if I kept you from what I couldn't give you, a family that fits on a Christmas card. He tasted iron. What was in the box? Money to move, enough to make leaving look like my idea. It was practical. She closed her eyes, opened them again. I took the bus to Boston with a suitcase and a Ziploc bag with a printout of our baby and a toothbrush I forgot to replace for a week because I couldn't see how the next 5 minutes were going to go. And then I had Emily and Michael, and I never had time to be anything but in motion. He pressed his knuckles into his thighs. He thought of a ring in his desk drawer, a green stone that reminded him of a summer night behind a bodega, a laugh, a promise. He thought of all the days that had followed the night at the Whitmore. His mother talking about duty, about family, about the Carter name like it was a suit he couldn't take off without losing the skin under it. He thought about capitulation passing itself off as care, and he signed the paper that cut him back in, and he went to work, because work is a clean thing compared to love. You should have been able to find me, she said, and he heard the knife in it, the part that would always be sharp because it had to be to hold together. I was under my name, I didn't hide. I took a second job at a diner so the nights felt less long, and I put both names on the mailbox because I couldn't bear the sight of my own name alone. I looked, he said, and he had. He had tapped their last photo into a search bar and found nothing because he didn't know how to look for someone who was moving constantly to stay afloat. He had saved her contact on his phone and never pressed call. Not enough, he added, because the truth doesn't need to sound noble to be true. A nurse came to the door then. Mr. Carter, Ms. Moore, Dr. Patel would like a few minutes. Dr. Patel had that particular calm good surgeons cultivate, a gentleness around the jaw and something hard around the eyes, sharpened by the decisions she had to make quickly. She pulled up an image on her tablet, a beating heart rendered in grayscale. "We're looking at hypertrophic cardiomyopathy," she said. "The septum's thickened, obstructing blood flow. Medication helps, but for a child with symptoms like Michael's, a septal myectomy is our best option. We do a lot of them here." I don't say routine because surgery on a child never is, but we know this procedure and we trust our team. Rebecca's hands tightened around her cup. "Genetic, often," Dr. Patel said. "We'll test, we'll ask about your family histories. Both of your children will need screening. Mr. Carter, if your father had early cardiac issues." "He died at 52, Jason said. "Heart attack. His father at 58. No one. We didn't talk about what our blood might be hiding." Dr. Patel nodded without judgment. "We'll talk after the initial tests. For now, it's about timing, resources, and support." She looked at them both as if they were a single unit whose parts had calcified separately but still wanted to move together. "I can get you a slot day after tomorrow." Jason didn't look at his phone for the next 3 hours. He missed 2 board calls, 4 texts from his COO, and 6 from his mother. He drank hospital coffee that tasted like someone had told it to be coffee at knife point. He sat in a chair with a stain shaped like a country he would never visit and watched his son breathe in, breathe out. "Are you going to stay?" Emily asked at 2 in the morning, appearing beside him like a very small judge. Her voice was casual, her eyes weren't. "As long as you want me to," he said. She considered this, nodded once, and handed him a blanket. "You look cold." Chapter 4. Stormfront. The morning of the surgery, Boston was gray to the bone. Rain stitched silver lines down the window. Michael looked impossibly small on the gurney, the hospital gown too big, the IV line a little river anchored to his arm. Emily walked beside him like a soldier in a story where soldiers guard what matters most because they're too young to be anything but brave. Jason had just signed the consent forms when his mother walked out of the elevator and into the thick of his life. Millionaire Carter knew how to enter a room. She was assembled, pearls stern at her throat, a trench coat the color of expensive tea, hair that never met a stray. She had built charities and careers, and she had built her son. She had always been certain she knew how to fortify love. "Jason," her voice was a sheet of glass. "You haven't returned my calls." "Mother," he said, the word came out like a challenge. He didn't know until that moment how tired he was of the way she made him feel like a boy with a debt counting down. Her eyes slid to Rebecca. Something like recognition flickered and hardened. "Ah," she said, "this again." The words detonated in him. He stepped into her line of sight until he blocked her view of Rebecca entirely. "No, not this again. Not a woman you think you can steamroll because you've decided her life comes second to my PR. This is my family. You're Jason, really." Her gaze swung to the gurney, to the small, sleeping face. She looked at Emily, at the tolerantly suspicious tilt of her mouth. The line between Alina's brows softened, then slammed back into place. "Are you telling me, my son," he said quietly, "and my daughter?" For the first time in his life, he saw his mother lose the choreography. The words left her without a plan to hold them. You couldn't be bothered to tell me." It came out small and cruel at once. "You lied to her at the Whitmore," he said, and the waiting room learned that a man with power can sound dangerous without raising his voice. "You told her I was going back to Claire when you knew I planned to end it. You told her she would ruin my life if she kept me, and you made sure I wouldn't know how to find her. You cut me off from my children before they had names." Alina's jaw tightened helplessly. "I was protecting you," she said, as if the answer were obvious and years hadn't made it less so. "Oh," he said, "you were protecting the part of yourself that couldn't bear to watch me choose something you couldn't control. You were protecting the Christmas card." Alina flinched, just a little. Her gaze dropped to the folder in his hand, the consent form with his name written with the same hand that had signed mergers and acquisitions and homes. She looked like someone who had reached out for a railing she thought was there and found air. The double doors opened. Dr. Patel filled the space with purposeful kindness. "We're ready," she said. She looked at Rebecca. "We'll page you the minute we have news." Jason squeezed Michael's foot through the thin hospital blanket. "I'll be right here," he said. He pressed a kiss to his son's forehead and tasted salt. Emily leaned beside him, whispered into Michael's ear, "You come back, okay? I have to show you the dumb face Dad makes when he sleeps." Michael's mouth quirked in the barest suggestion of a smile, even as a nurse's gloved hand gently ushered the gurney through the doors. And then there was nothing to do but wait. Chapter 5. Knife and prayer. Waiting stretched and thinned and stretched again. The coffee turned to mud in their cups. Rebecca sat with her knees touching, fingers steepled under her chin. Emily fell asleep with her head on her mother's lap, a fortress of girl and woman and all the years between them. Jason paced until he had worn a shallow groove in the hospital's impeccable floor. Sit, Rebecca murmured after a while. He sat. It felt like obedience and also like something else, something he'd been missing, someone telling him what to do because they needed him human, not heroic. Eleanor stood at a distance, a neutral island in a busy sea. She seemed startled by her own stillness. Eventually she came closer and stopped beside Jason, not quite looking at him. I didn't know, she said quietly. If I had known, you would have done exactly what you did, he said. He kept his eyes on the door like he could pull it open with his will. You would have told yourself you were saving me. You would have reached for your old friend, Control. Something flickered under the pearl. He saw a woman he had never let himself see, a young one once, hair windblown, a hand pressed against glass with no one on the other side. She took a breath. I lost a baby before you, she said. 8 months, we had a name, I had a crib. Her mouth shook. He died in a quiet room, and I decided if I made everything else perfect, then nothing could die like that again. It was a surprise, kindly and cruel at once. He hadn't expected it, and it made everything he knew about her both more and less explicable. He stared at her, and for a moment he was a boy again, realizing his mother had been someone before she became his mother, which should have been an act of tenderness and had instead been an act of fear. I'm sorry, he said. It was true. It wasn't enough. Before she could answer, the doors opened. Dr. Patel's face was its own language. It went well, she said, and the room fell forward soundlessly, suddenly, like a wave that had been building all morning finally breaking. We removed the obstructing tissue. His heart's already functioning better. He'll be sedated for a day or two, then recovery. Rebecca's hands covered her face. Her shoulders shook once violently, and then she breathed, a sound like surf. Jason reached for her without thinking, and she didn't push him away. He was crying before he realized it. Eleanor stood very still beside them, pearls fierce against her throat, eyes shining with something he had never seen there, humility. Chapter 6, The ICU and Small Mercies. Michael had a tube in his mouth and machines that breathed beside him, and he looked like every hope and every terror Jason had ever had made manifest. Emily stood on tiptoe at the side of the bed, her fingers wrapped around a piece of tape on the railing like she was anchoring him through sheer will. Hey, Jason said softly, it's okay to sleep. She glanced at him, fierce and tired. I don't sleep. You will, he said. When your brother snores, I'll make sure he's okay. He doesn't snore, she informed him primly. He hums. It became a liturgy, the two of them trading what they could offer. Jokes, hot chocolate from the cafeteria, the names of the nurses with sparkly shoes and the one who kept origami in her pocket. He learned that Emily hated syrup on her pancakes because it made them soggy, that Michael wanted to build a rocket named Bluebird because he liked the way it sounded in his mouth, and that Rebecca could drink coffee so black it had a personality. He slept in a chair and woke up with his neck at angles he wouldn't admit. He missed a vote on a company acquisition and didn't care in a way that terrified him and felt like revelation. He walked outside one night and found the city cold and clean and indifferent, and he called his COO and said, "You'll manage without me." When Michael opened his eyes for the first time, it felt like sunrise. He blinked once, twice, then found Emily, then Rebecca, then Jason. He tried to smile and made something close enough to bring the world to its knees. Hey, Jason said, and it was the most complicated word he'd ever said. You scared us. I was sleeping, Michael croaked around the dryness in his throat. You're the one with the dumb sleep face. Emily burst out laughing with a sound that seemed to loosen the air itself. Told you, she said to no one in particular. Eleanor appeared the next afternoon, not dressed for war this time. She wore a sweater the color of sea glass and no makeup. She looked like a woman practicing something she hadn't said in a long time. Please. Hello, Michael, she said at the foot of the bed. I'm your grandmother. Michael blinked at her. You missed a lot. A beat. Then Eleanor Carter, who could turn a gala into a battlefield, laughed. It sounded rusty human. I did, she said. I hope you let me try to make up for it. Emily stood in the corner, arms crossed, a gatekeeper judging an unworthy. Michael shrugged. Okay, he decided, because kids live in the present tense and cut cords adults tangle themselves in for sport. Do you know how to play chess? A nurse named Lionel walked by just then and whispered to Jason, You're a lucky man. Jason nodded, wondered if luck is what you call it when a second chance walks into the ICU and decides to sit down. Chapter 7, The Letter. When the crisis had shifted into the daily labor of recovery, Dr. Patel pulled Jason aside. We need your father's records, she said, kind as always. Not just dates, any mention of hypertrophy, arrhythmias, sudden death in the family. It was almost a relief to have an errand. He drove to the brownstone he'd grown up in, a museum of the life his mother curated like it was a catalog she couldn't stop controlling. The housekeeper, Rosa, met him at the door with her hands on her hips and a reproach behind her eyes. She was scared, Rosa said in Spanish. The first time she's still scared, but you have a bigger heart than this house lets you have and you go use it. He found the fireproof box in his father's office. He had sat in that chair as a boy, leather swallowing him whole while his father told him stories about building things you could touch with your hands. He opened the box. He took out paper after paper. He found the cardiologist's notes, mild septal hypertrophy. He found a mention of a beta blocker. He found a clipping from a medical journal his father had underlined like he was studying for a test no one would give him. He also found something he didn't know he was looking for, a letter in an envelope with his name on it and a crease like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The handwriting was unmistakable. The letter smelled like cheap pens and late nights. Jason, I'm at the Whitmore with tea I can't drink. I was going to tell you. I am. There's a picture in my pocket of something as big as a lima bean that's somehow a person. I thought we were going to build a life and then your mother and Claire were there and I felt small in a way I promised myself not to. If you want this me us the lima bean meet me at the bench behind the bodega with the purple flowers that smell like hope. Tonight after the dinner. If you don't I'll go. I don't want to be a scandal in your mother's paper. I just want you not to hate me for doing what I have to do to keep from breaking in public. I love you. That's the truth that makes everything else small. The letter had never been mailed. It had been carefully slid among documents no one looked at until someone needed to validate a death. He felt anger rise like floodwater and then drop into something quieter, something heavier. He put the letter in his jacket pocket and felt it burn there. On his way out, he stopped at the framed photo of his parents on their wedding day. His mother was radiant, eyes like sharp light. His father looked like a man who had won a prize he didn't think he deserved. He found his mother in the kitchen, of all places, pressing her fingers into dough like she could convince it to become something more obedient than bread. She looked up. Did you find what you needed? I found what you hid from me, he said and set the letter down like a knife. She read it. Her face didn't change and then it did in small, private ways. Muscles you don't know are there until they ache. I asked her not to tell you, she said, so quiet the refrigerator hummed over her words. I believed if you saw the way through you'd choose duty over whatever this was. Love, he said, call it by its name. She lifted her chin as if to argue, then put it down, a surrender. I am sorry, she said. Not perfect apology, not enough for 10 years, but so hard one in her mouth that he had to look away. You come to Boston, he said. You sit beside a boy whose chest will be a roadmap of what we did to keep him here, and you tell him what you just told me. You tell his sister what you plan to do to earn her. You show up at 10 a.m. with pancakes if that's what Rebecca asks. You take it one morning at a time until they believe you mean it. You lean into the luck you have. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. Rosa handed her a tissue with a look that said finally. Chapter 8. A new rhythm. Recovery is a long soft word for a hard broken thing. It meant therapy. It meant a scar Michael touched absent-mindedly like he was learning a new map of himself. It meant Emily sitting on the edge of the hospital bed with a math book, the pencil tapping out a code. 1 for good news, 2 for bad, 3 for telling the boy to stop pushing limits. Jason's days became a loop he craved. He brought hot chocolate in the mornings and learned that there is a very specific amount of whipped cream a 10-year-old trusts. He worked in the hallway. He learned the name of a security guard who told him his own story about a son and a surgery. He started measuring time by when the nurse named Jody would start her shift and by how the light changed in the room around 4 in the afternoon. He tried to make himself useful. He installed a reading lamp with a dimmer because Emily said the hospital ones were all wrong. He held a straw for Michael when his hands shook. He was clumsy and he was there, and there is a long distance between those two that you can cross with enough repetition. Rebecca watched him as if she was waiting for him to blink and disappear. One afternoon, she found him untangling IV lines with the delicacy of someone setting up a model train set he didn't want to ruin. You're not bad at this, she said softly. I have no idea what I'm doing, he admitted. He had never said that sentence in his life. Welcome to parenthood, she said and smiled like it wasn't all pain. A week after Michael came home, Jason taught Emily to make pancakes in Rebecca's kitchen. Rebecca stood in the doorway, hip against the frame, arms folded, performing the rare and sacred ritual of letting someone else take care of breakfast. Emily was a tyrant about bubbles forming before the flip. Michael on a stool, supervised like a foreman with a tiny clipboard only he could see. You're a terrible cook, Rebecca said to Jason. That's going to hurt when I open my Michelin-starred breakfast bodega, he said dryly. Emily studied his pancake like a work of art. It's not burnt, she announced as if this were Nobel-level achievement. It's golden. Your standards are suspiciously low, Rebecca observed. Mom, Emily said. We are scientists. We know golden when we see it. That night when the kids were asleep and the house had that precious hush in it that makes adults whisper, they stood on the back step under a sky trying on snow. They like you, Rebecca said. The words had wonder and worry in them. I like them, he said, then after a beat he was afraid of. I like you. She laughed, a sound he'd memorized once and lost. You like the version of me you remember. The one who used to jump in the river even when it was too cold. I like the one who learned to carry 3 plates at once and not spill a drop because she had to keep 2 humans alive, he said. I like the one who told a millionaire she didn't want his money, she wanted him present and accountable. She looked at the yard, then at him, then away. Don't make promises you can't keep. I used to do that, he said. I used to think promises were words. Turns out they're schedules and groceries and showing up unasked. Her mouth tilted. Get me groceries tomorrow, let's start there. Chapter 9, Winter Like Christmas came with the soft insistence of a song you almost remember. Jason managed to set up 2 bedrooms in his Manhattan townhouse without turning it into a mausoleum of taste. Emily's shelves were full of spines she loved, from Space Adventures to a battered copy of Anne of Green Gables. Michael's room was a universe of rockets, a star chart on the ceiling. They didn't move in, they visited. They sat on the floor and ate pizza and built Lego towers that defied engineering and then fell anyway, and he learned to like the sound of his own house not being silent. On Christmas morning he handed Rebecca a small box. Her fingers hovered over it like it was a bomb. Don't run, he said. He tried to make a joke of it and didn't quite. I'm not asking for an answer. I just need you to know I kept it. Inside was the ring he had bought a decade ago, a narrow band with an emerald that had seemed like it knew her before he did. She touched it as if it might burn her. You kept this, couldn't return it, he said, even when I tried to be very grown-up about everything. She closed the box. I don't know what the future looks like, she said. Me neither, he said, but I want to see it with you. She didn't give it back. Eleanor showed up with cinnamon rolls she had made herself, hands dusted with flour, and a sweater that had definitely been knit by someone who loved the person wearing it. Emily made her explain the recipe and produce proof she had cream cheese and not frosting from a tub. Michael beat her at chess once and tried not to celebrate too hard. Claire Whitman appeared in the new year at a hospital fundraiser, the kind where people in gowns talk about children with tubes and find a way to toast to the bravery of little hearts. She pulled Jason aside with an almost conscience. I told your mother you were in Boston, she said, gaze skittering. I thought you should know she was going. I thought, she swallowed. I thought it would make you choose. He almost thanked her. He didn't. The truth doesn't need to be polite. I did, he said. He found Rebecca at the bar in the corner, sipping seltzer with fake cheer. That's her, she said, not looking, not flinching. Claire of the perfect posture. And he said, because he was learning that truth is a conversation. Claire of the girl who deserved better than the picture my mother framed for her. You can say no when she comes with a foundation position. You can say no when I get in my own way. You can say no when it looks good but feels wrong. She nodded, and he thought maybe this was the shape of love now, mutual lines drawn carefully, a map of the heart with new street names. Chapter 10, Spring Thaw in March. When Boston starts to pretend it knows how to be warm, Emily fainted after climbing the stairs at school. The call came and the world tilted again, though not the same way this time. He was in Manhattan, in a meeting about a merger with a company he could buy with the change in his couch, and he walked out without a word and was on the road in 15 minutes. At the hospital, Dr. Patel was waiting with that calm that had become a balm in their lives. She's okay, she said, hands gentle but sure. Not a surgical case, not now, mild hypertrophy, manageable with medication and monitoring. She needs to be careful with soccer, careful with stairs until we know how her heart behaves under stress. She needs presence. He felt Rebecca's hand find his. It was automatic. It was also a decision. Emily woke to find both of them there, and it annoyed her as much as it soothed her. You're hovering, she said. Yes, Jason said simply. She scrunched her nose. Fine, but if you cry you're not allowed to embarrass me in front of my friends. He nodded gravely. I'll cry in the hallway. Rebecca brushed hair back from Emily's face. You scared me, she whispered. You cry too, Emily said, and a tiny smile broke through the stern. Jason took a leave of absence from the company without asking permission. The board was furious and practical. He didn't care in a way that had a weight to it, a decision you make with your body, not just your mouth. He worked from Boston when he worked at all. He learned the names of Emily's teachers and Michael's physical therapy regimen, and exactly how long it took for panic to crest and subside in Rebecca's eyes when one of the kids coughed at night. One afternoon in April, he walked into the kitchen with a bag of groceries and nearly dropped it. Rebecca stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, sunlight on her collarbone, the ring he had given her a lifetime ago now on her finger. It was small and green and decisive. She didn't make speeches. She just lifted her hand and smiled, and he crossed the room in 3 steps. Emily popped up from behind the island with a phone like a paparazzo. Operation Parent Trap, she announced triumphantly. Success! Operation what? Jason almost choked on a grape. Michael held up a sign he had obviously constructed from a cereal box. In crooked marker, mission: get mom and dad to kiss. Check. Rebecca laughed so hard she had to sit down. Traitors, she said to her children, and kissed him anyway. Epilogue: the beat that found them. They put a bench in the courtyard of the hospital with a small plaque no one but them would understand. It said, "For the years we lost and the ones we refused to." Jason wanted to attribute it Carter family or in grateful memory. But Rebecca had looked at him and said, not everything needs a name, and he knew better than to argue with a woman who could carry twins and a life and still make you laugh during a storm. Millionaire sat on that bench sometimes on Tuesday mornings when the courtyard was empty. She would read a book she pretended she liked and bring extra cinnamon rolls that were too dense but made with an earnestness that felt like a confession. Once she found a letter from Jason on the bench, just a few lines about forgiveness being in the practice, not the plea, and she didn't write back, but she started showing up every Tuesday. Dr. Patel came by the house for tea once and brought Emily a stethoscope. "Listen," she said, placing the ends in Emily's ears. "You can hear what your heart says about how it is." Emily pressed the bell to her chest and closed her eyes. "It says SHH, she whispered. "It says I'm here." Michael had a scar he traced with a finger when he was thinking. He told anyone who asked that he had a superhero zipper his surgeons kindly installed. He built Bluebird on the kitchen table with cardboard and string and an engine that lived in his brain. He told his dad the name was wrong, and then changed it to something he thought could get all the way to Mars, because he had learned recently that sometimes you get to revise your decisions when new information arrives. Jason stood in a doorway one night with his shoulder against the frame and watched Rebecca fall asleep on the couch, book on her chest, hair messy. Emily had her feet in his lap. Michael was asleep on her arm because of course he was. He thought about a call he answered because the world hummed wrong for a second and he listened. He thought about a letter trapped in a box for a decade. He thought about his father, about the men who die with their hands on their chests, and the way the world keeps moving without you unless you step into it with everything you have. He slipped outside onto the small back stoop and looked up. The stars weren't bright. City lights stole a little from them, and still they were there, stubborn, throwing their old light down. He put a hand over his heart almost without thinking and felt it moving. He felt the beat that wasn't just his anymore, the 4 count of a family learning to trust itself. In, out, in, out. He went back in to wake Rebecca. She blinked up at him, smiled. "You're hovering," she teased. "I am," he said, and bent to press his forehead to hers. "And I'm not leaving." In some stories, the end arrives like a bow. In this one, it arrived like a promise that was a practice. Breakfasts, board games, late-night fevers, olive oil spilled on the kitchen floor, a grandmother learning to listen, a surgeon's calm hands, and a bench where 4 people came to sit with the past and the future in equal measure. They didn't get back the 10 years the world had taken. But they did what you do when time has teeth. They bandaged, they named, they stayed. And in the staying, something like grace took a chair and leaned in. If you listened close, you could hear it, under the laughter, under the small arguments, under the names said at a whisper and a shout, the sound that had almost stopped and then, in a room full of machines and hope, began again. The beat held, it would keep holding.